Ryan's office revenge. The slap came out of nowhere, cracking across my face so hard my reading glasses flew off and skittered across the polished restaurant floor. The sound split through the elegant dining room like breaking glass, and every conversation in that place died instantly. My name is Lucas Patterson. I'm 54 years old, and until that moment I'd spent the last 12 years working as Senior Operations Director at Summit Consulting Partners here in Seattle. Before that, I served 8 years in the Navy, which taught me a thing or two about honor, respect, and handling difficult situations. But nothing in my military training prepared me for what happened that night at the Harbor Club. Let me back up and explain how one moment of accidental contact turned into the best decision I ever made. Summit. Consulting to partners wasn't the biggest name in the industry, but we had solid clients and a reputation for getting results without the inflated fees charged by the major firms. I wasn't one of those flashy consultants who presented to executives in glass-walled boardrooms. I was the guy who made those contracts actually work after they were signed. I built implementation frameworks, managed teams, identified problems before they derailed projects, and handled crises at 2 a.m. when everything seemed ready to collapse. I'd worked my way up from junior analyst to senior operations director over 12 years of steady, reliable performance. My military background served me well in corporate America. I understood chain of command, followed procedures, delivered what I promised. The younger employees respected me because I'd take time to mentor them. The executives relied on me because I got things done without drama. That was before Oliver Sterling showed up. Oliver was 26, fresh out of some prestigious MBA program, and happened to be the CEO's son. He'd been working as our strategic consultant for about 8 months, though nobody could figure out what he actually consulted on. He had the kind of effortless arrogance that comes from never experiencing real consequences for anything. Designer suits, expensive watch, perfect haircut, and that smug confidence of someone who'd never had to earn respect. The kid came from serious money. Private schools, exclusive clubs, the whole package. He'd joined Summit supposedly to modernize our approach and expand our client base, which mostly meant questioning decisions made by people with decades more experience than him. I'd tried to stay professional with Oliver. In the Navy, you learn to work with all types. But there was something about watching him coast on daddy's connections, while experienced people did the actual work that got under my skin. He'd waltz into meetings, offer half-baked ideas, then disappear while we figured out how to make them actually function. When projects succeeded, he'd somehow get mentioned in the victory emails. When they struggled, he was nowhere to be found. The company had reserved the entire second floor of the Harbor Club for our annual client appreciation dinner. These events were designed to make everyone feel valued and important. Premium bar, 5-course meal, speeches about how our people were our greatest asset, the usual corporate theater. The Harbor Club was the kind of upscale place that charges $50 for a steak and makes you feel sophisticated for paying it. Floor-to-ceiling windows, industrial chic decor, crisp white linens, round tables with elegant place cards written in calligraphy that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. I'd almost skipped the event. Had a client presentation scheduled for Monday morning that needed work, quarterly reports requiring review, the kind of tasks that don't respect weekend boundaries, but my colleague Hunter had convinced me to attend. "Come on, Lucas," he'd said that afternoon. "You never go to these things anymore. People are starting to think you're deliberately antisocial." "I am deliberately antisocial," I'd replied. "Exactly my point. Show your face for one evening. Have a drink, leave early if you hate it." He made a fair point. I'd missed the last several company events. Eventually, absence becomes a pattern that gets noticed and interpreted. The guy who doesn't care about team culture, who doesn't invest in relationships. That's how you end up on the wrong list when budget cuts come around. So I went. Wore my Navy suit, the one that projected professional competence without trying too hard. Black shoes I'd polished that morning out of old military habit. Simple watch my ex-wife had given me for my 40th birthday, back when we still thought our marriage might work out. The restaurant was already buzzing when I arrived exactly on time, which in corporate culture means about 10 minutes late, since everyone else gets there early to network and position themselves. Clusters of people holding cocktails, laughing maybe a little too loudly, voices overlapping in that distinctive rhythm of forced professional camaraderie. I recognized most faces scattered throughout the space. Colleagues from various departments, key clients, board members I'd only seen in company newsletters. Oliver was holding court near the bar when I walked in, surrounded by a small group of younger employees who seemed fascinated by whatever story he was telling. He had that animated way of talking, hands gesturing dramatically, like everything that happened to him was inherently more interesting than anything that happened to anyone else. I grabbed a beer from the bar and found Hunter near the appetizer station. He was talking with someone from finance, both sampling tiny portions of something that looked expensive but tasted disappointingly bland. "You actually came," Hunter said when he spotted me. "Don't sound so amazed. I'm always amazed when you do anything remotely social outside mandatory work requirements. We talked for a while about safe topics that fill space without requiring real vulnerability. Current projects, weekend plans, the new hire who kept microwaving fish in the break room despite multiple complaints. It was comfortable, easy conversation that made events like this tolerable." The evening progressed exactly as expected. People mingled with strategic intent. Alcohol flowed freely. Someone from executive leadership delivered a brief speech about gratitude and dedication. Polite applause, then conversations resumed. I was starting to think I might actually survive the entire evening without incident when I decided to get another beer. The bar had gotten crowded, people standing 3 deep, waving hands to get the bartender's attention, shouting drink orders over the ambient noise. I squeezed into a narrow gap between 2 conversations, waiting patiently for someone to notice my empty bottle. The guy to my left was telling some story about a golf tournament that apparently had everyone in stitches. The woman to my right was laughing with excessive enthusiasm at something that probably wasn't as hilarious as her reaction suggested. Standard corporate event behavior. Everything's funnier after 2 drinks and when you're trying to impress colleagues. I stood there waiting when someone behind me shifted position. I stepped back instinctively, just a small adjustment to create space and avoid blocking their path. Basic courtesy that happens constantly in crowded environments without anyone thinking twice about it. My elbow made the slightest contact with someone else. Barely a brush, fabric against fabric. The kind of accidental touch that occurs hundreds of times at every crowded gathering without anyone registering it happened. I didn't immediately realize who I'd bumped until I turned my head and saw Oliver Sterling standing there. He stumbled slightly, though the contact had been so minimal it couldn't possibly have affected his balance. A few drops of champagne sloshed over the rim of his glass onto his hand. For one brief moment, I expected him to laugh it off like any reasonable adult would when someone accidentally makes minor contact in a crowded space. Maybe nod acknowledgement, maybe not even notice at all. Instead, his face transformed completely. Eyes narrowing, mouth twisting into something ugly and hostile. Like I'd personally insulted his entire family lineage. "Are you kidding me right now?" he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise and grab attention from nearby conversations. I blinked, still holding my empty beer bottle, my brain struggling to process his reaction. "Sorry, I didn't mean..." That's when his hand came up and slapped me across the face with tremendous force. The impact sent my glasses flying off my head, and they skittered across the polished floor with a scraping sound that somehow seemed louder than the slap itself. The restaurant went silent. Not gradually, but instantly, like someone had pressed a mute button on reality. I stood there absolutely stunned, my cheek burning with sharp pain, ears ringing from the violence of the blow. I could taste blood where my teeth had caught the soft flesh inside my mouth. My vision starred for a moment, and I actually staggered backward from the impact. People were staring, but not with shock or concern. They were staring with mouths slightly open, drinks forgotten halfway to their lips, forks suspended in midair, like they were watching dinner theater. "Watch where you're going, you washed-up old loser!" Oliver screamed with such volume I felt the words physically hit my chest. He was pointing at me now, his face flushed with rage, that champagne flute still gripped in his other hand like he might throw it next if I didn't retreat fast enough. And then the laughter started. Not from Oliver, but from the room. From my colleagues and co-workers. People I'd worked alongside for over a decade. People who'd asked for my help on challenging projects, who'd invited me to their retirement parties, who'd smiled and called me by name every morning for years. Isabella from Human Resources threw her head back in genuine amusement, like this was the funniest thing she'd witnessed all year. 2 executives from Acquisitions were grinning behind their wine glasses, shoulders shaking with barely contained laughter. Even the senior vice president at the head table smiled faintly and glanced away, shaking his head like I'd committed some mildly embarrassing social mistake rather than being violently assaulted. They thought it was entertaining. A 26-year-old trust fund kid slapping a 54-year-old Navy veteran across the face in public, and they found it hilarious. I looked around desperately, searching for one person who appeared horrified or outraged, someone who might stand up and declare that this behavior was completely unacceptable. Nobody did. Not a single person. I could see Sofia Martinez moving purposefully toward me through the crowd. She was our VP of marketing, mid-40s, always impeccably dressed, with that tight professional expression she wore whenever something needed to be managed before it became a corporate liability. She reached me in quick steps and grabbed my forearm, not with concern or care, but with the firm grip of someone removing an obstacle. "Leave immediately," she hissed quietly enough that only I could hear over the buzz of conversation gradually resuming around us. "We'll address this through proper channels." Address this appropriately? I thought. The kid just committed assault in front of 60 witnesses, and you want me to leave so you can pretend it never happened? But before I could formulate a response, before I could process what was happening, or decide how to react, Sophia spoke up from her position near Oliver. "Apologize to Oliver right now," she said, her voice not particularly loud, but carrying across the hushed space with unmistakable authority. Calm, commanding, absolutely final. Or you can clean out your desk first thing, Monday morning. The entire restaurant was watching now, waiting. 60 pairs of eyes locked on me with anticipation, waiting to see whether I'd crumble under the pressure and provide the apology they all expected. The submission that would restore the evening's equilibrium and allow everyone to return to their meals and networking conversations. Oliver stood there with his arms crossed, smirking slightly like he'd won some important contest, like this was a game with clear rules and he'd just captured the winning piece. I could have done it. Could have swallowed every ounce of my pride and dignity, mumbled the apology they demanded, and let them sweep this entire incident under the corporate rug. Returned to my table, finished my meal, pretended my face wasn't throbbing, and my colleagues hadn't just laughed at my public humiliation. That's what they expected. That's what people like me always do when confronted by people like him. But something inside me broke, not loudly or dramatically. Just a quiet, cold certainty settling in my chest like ice water. Maybe it was my Navy training kicking in. Maybe it was 12 years of watching privileged kids like Oliver coast on daddy's money while experienced people did the real work. Maybe I was just tired of being treated like I was disposable at 54. I didn't apologize. I didn't argue or defend myself or attempt to explain what had actually happened. I didn't say a single word to anyone in that room. I simply pulled my arm free from Sophia's controlling grip, turned deliberately, and walked directly toward the exit with my head held high. Behind me, the whispers erupted immediately. Urgent, excited conversations that would transform into the stories people told around the office Monday morning. Did you see that? Can you believe he just walked out without apologizing? Sophia's definitely going to fire him for insubordination. I didn't look back even once. The hallway outside the private dining room was bright and sterile. Oppressively quiet. I could still hear muffled conversation filtering through the closed doors behind me. The low hum of people already moving past the incident, returning to their meals and networking as though nothing significant had occurred. I walked past the elevators without stopping, past the elegant lobby with its tasteful artwork and expensive furniture, straight through the revolving door into the cool Seattle evening air. The city hummed around me with complete indifference to whatever personal catastrophe I'd just experienced. Standing on that sidewalk beneath the restaurant's sophisticated awning, I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling, not from fear or anxiety, but from pure white-hot rage. The kind that makes your vision narrow and your thoughts become sharp and absolutely focused. I scrolled through my email until I found the message I'd been deliberately ignoring for 3 weeks. It was from Grace Thompson, Senior Investigator for Corporate Ethics and Compliance. She'd reached out because she was conducting a confidential investigation into Summit Consulting Partners. Multiple anonymous complaints had been filed alleging financial irregularities, potential conflicts of interest, possible misuse of company resources. She wanted to speak with employees who'd been with the organization long enough to notice patterns, who might possess information that could help construct the larger picture of what was actually happening behind closed doors. I'd read her email when it first arrived, considered responding for about 45 seconds, then archived it without replying. I didn't want involvement, didn't want to become the whistleblower who ended up unemployed and professionally blacklisted. Corporate investigations are messy and drag on for months. Even when they uncover genuine wrongdoing, the executives typically land on their feet with generous severance packages while everyone else gets sacrificed. But standing on that sidewalk with my face still burning from Oliver's slap, my career hanging by the thinnest thread, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I was already under the bus. There was no safety left to protect, no position left to preserve. I pulled up the archived email and hit reply before rational caution could override my anger. Ms. Thompson, I'm ready to talk. Let's meet tomorrow if possible. I sent it before I could change my mind, then walked to the parking garage and drove home through streets that seemed too normal for what I'd just set in motion. I didn't sleep that night, didn't even attempt it. I sat in my living room in complete darkness, replaying the slap over and over like a film stuck on repeat. The sound of impact, the eruption of laughter, Sophia's ultimatum delivered with such casual cruelty, the way absolutely everyone just watched without intervening. By the time dawn light began filtering through my blinds, I'd made my final decision. I wasn't going to apologize to anyone. I wasn't going to beg for my job back. I was going to systematically dismantle everything Oliver and Sophia had built, piece by careful piece. Grace responded to my email at 6:30 a.m. Riverside Cafe on Pine Street, 10 a.m. Quiet place where we can talk freely. I showered thoroughly, put on clothes that projected professional competence without suggesting I was trying too hard to impress anyone. Dark jeans, crisp white shirt, navy blazer. The kind of outfit that communicates seriousness without screaming desperation. Riverside Cafe was exactly the type of establishment you'd select for a conversation you didn't want anyone to overhear. Tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, dim lighting filtered through dusty windows, mismatched furniture that looked rescued from estate sales, the persistent smell of burnt coffee and old wood. Tables occupied by people reading newspapers and deliberately minding their own business. Grace was already seated when I arrived, positioned at a corner table with her back against the wall, commanding a clear view of the entire space. Mid-40s, immaculate charcoal suit, eyes that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. The kind of woman who'd spent years observing powerful people construct elaborate lies and had learned to see through every deception without visible effort. She had a laptop open and a leather notebook filled with handwriting so precise it almost looked typed. A cup of black coffee sat untouched in front of her. "Lucas Patterson?" she asked as I approached her table. "That's me." She gestured toward the empty chair across from her. "Please sit. Would you like coffee?" "I'm good, thank you." She closed her laptop deliberately and gave me her complete, undivided attention. No preliminary small talk, no gentle easing into difficult topics. "You said you're ready to talk," she began without preamble. "What changed your mind about reaching out?" So I told her absolutely everything. The dinner at the Harbor Club, the accidental bump that barely qualified as contact, the slap that sent my glasses flying across the floor, Oliver screaming at me in front of 60 people while they watched and did nothing. The laughter that erupted from my colleagues like it was the most entertaining thing they'd witnessed all year. Sophia's ultimatum delivered with cold finality. Grace listened without interrupting even once, taking notes in quick, precise strokes with a pen that looked expensive. Her expression remained completely neutral throughout my entire account, revealing no shock or sympathy or judgment, just intensely focused attention, like she was assembling pieces of an elaborate puzzle she'd been working on for months. When I finally finished, she looked up from her notes. "Do you have any documentation?" she asked directly. "Emails, expense reports, anything that demonstrates a pattern of misconduct from either Oliver or Sophia?" I thought carefully, mentally scrolling through years of interactions and observations. Maybe. Oliver's been getting paid as a consultant for 8 months, but I've never seen any actual work product, and there have been budget discrepancies on projects I manage directly, expenses that don't align with documented work. She leaned forward slightly, her interest visibly sharpening. "Can you access those records?" "Probably, but if I provide that information, I'm finished at Summit. They'll know it came from me." "You might already be finished there," she said with blunt honesty. "The question is whether you're finished quietly while they protect themselves, or finished in a way that holds them accountable." She was right. I looked at her steadily. "What happens if I give you documentation?" "I investigate thoroughly. If there's credible evidence of financial impropriety or ethics violations, I compile a comprehensive report and file it with the board. They're legally required to act. If Oliver and Sophia are implicated in wrongdoing, they'll face serious consequences. How long do I have to decide?" "As long as you need. But the longer you wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks. People like this are exceptionally skilled at making problems disappear." I stood from my chair. "I'll be in touch very soon." She handed me a plain white business card with minimal information. My direct line. Call anytime, day or night. I spent the weekend thinking obsessively, but by Monday morning I knew what I had to do. I was going to the office, and I was going to systematically copy every file that might prove Oliver had been treating Summit like his personal bank account. The office felt different when I walked in Monday morning. Quieter, more tense, like everyone was holding their breath waiting to see if I'd actually show up after the weekend's humiliation. I walked in at my normal time, carrying my laptop bag and coffee from the shop across the street. My cheek still showed faint discoloration where Oliver's ring had caught skin. People stared. Some averted their eyes quickly, suddenly fascinated by their computer screens. Others watched me like I was a live explosive that might detonate without warning. I sat down at my desk, logged into the system, and began working. Normal work, project updates, client emails, timeline revisions. The most effective way to avoid suspicion is to act like absolutely nothing has changed. Around 10 a.m., Sophia appeared at my cubicle. "Lucas, can we talk privately?" She led me to a small conference room on the 3rd floor, the kind with uncomfortable chairs, and the persistent smell of stale coffee where bad news gets delivered behind closed doors. "About Friday evening," she began, sitting across from me with her hands folded. "You mean when I was physically assaulted in front of the entire company?" Her jaw tightened visibly. "That's not how we're characterizing the incident for documentation purposes." "How are you characterizing it?" She sighed, like I was being deliberately difficult. "Look, emotions were elevated. Oliver feels terrible about how things escalated, but you also created unnecessary conflict by not de-escalating when you had the opportunity." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Let me make sure I understand. You're telling me I'm responsible for not de-escalating after someone slapped me across the face?" She didn't respond, just studied her folded hands. "Is Oliver planning to fire me?" I asked directly. She hesitated. "That depends on how you handle the next few days. He's willing to move past this if you demonstrate similar willingness." Translation: keep silent, pretend nothing happened. Maybe you keep your job. "I need time to consider my options," I said neutrally. "Don't take too long. Oliver needs to know where you stand by Friday." After she left, I pulled out my phone and texted Grace. "I'm committed. Tell me exactly what you need." Her response came immediately. "Financial records going back 18 months. Expense, reports, communications about budget allocations. Anything showing money moving where it shouldn't." Over the next 3 days, I transformed into a ghost in my own workplace. I arrived early, stayed late, worked through lunch. Nobody questioned my dedication because I'd always been that employee. But while everyone assumed I was being thorough, I was systematically copying files with methodical precision. Budget reports spanning 18 months. Expense submissions with supporting receipts. Client invoices that didn't align with deliverables we'd provided. Email threads where Sophia had authorized spending that violated established company policy. The deeper I excavated, the more evidence I uncovered. Oliver's name appeared on consulting invoices to 4 different client accounts over 8 months. Each listed deliberately vague deliverables, like strategic market analysis, with 0 supporting documentation. No reports, no presentations, nothing. $45,000 total paid to an LLC registered in his name. Travel expenses for trips Oliver and Sophia had taken together. San Francisco, Denver, Austin, all billed to client projects that had nothing to do with those cities. The projects were for companies headquartered elsewhere entirely. Bonuses Sophia had authorized for herself that exceeded the compensation caps in her contract by $32,000. Performance reviews she'd written for employees who'd questioned Oliver's role suddenly filled with negative language that appeared nowhere in their previous evaluations. By Wednesday evening, I had everything Grace needed: 175 pages of documentation proving systematic financial misconduct. I compiled it into an encrypted folder and sent it to Grace at 11 p.m. from a coffee shop downtown. Her response came 20 minutes later. This documentation is substantial and damning, more than sufficient for a formal investigation. I need several days to verify details. Maintain normal behavior. Friday afternoon, Sophia summoned me to Oliver's temporary office. He was sitting behind the desk, trying to look authoritative. "Close the door," he instructed. He leaned back in his chair. "Sophia tells me you're still considering how to move forward." "I am." "Lucas, I'm going to be transparent. What happened at the dinner was unfortunate. I overreacted. But walking out created a bigger problem than necessary. I said nothing. I'm prepared to put this behind us permanently, but I need to know you're not going to turn this into some HR nightmare that damages the firm. What does that mean specifically? It means you acknowledge it was a misunderstanding. We all move forward professionally." I studied his face. Perfect haircut, expensive suit, that confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences. "I'll let you know Monday." "Excellent." That evening, Grace called. "I'm presenting to the audit committee Monday at 9 a.m. The documentation shows systematic fraud. You're protected under federal whistleblower law." Monday morning, I arrived before dawn. By 9:15, whispers flooded the office. Investigators upstairs. Oliver locked in conferences. By 10:30, his assistant walked out carrying a box, tears streaming. By 11 a.m., security cordoned off the executive wing. At noon, the interim CEO called an emergency meeting. Oliver Sterling is no longer employed with Summit Consulting Partners, effective immediately. The room erupted. Someone asked about Friday's incident. She glanced at me, then away. "I can't comment. By week's end, Sophia was terminated and escorted out. The CEO faced board inquiry. Grace called that weekend. It's over. Oliver's terminated with no severance. Sophia's facing fraud charges. And me? The new leadership wants to meet. I'd expect good news." Tuesday morning, the new CEO offered me Senior VP of Operations. $185,000, full benefits, formal apology from the board. I'll take it. A month later, sitting in my new office, a message popped up from an unknown number. "I know what you did. You destroyed everything." I deleted it without responding. Justice isn't about having the last word. It's about building something better from the ruins of corruption. Oliver's gone. Sophia's facing charges. The people who laughed now step aside when they see me. Me? I sleep soundly knowing I didn't just survive their arrogance. I ended it. Sometimes one slap doesn't just bruise your face. Sometimes it brings down an entire house of cards. Here's what I learned. Respect isn't something you can inherit or buy. It's something you earn through how you handle yourself when everything's falling apart. And sometimes the biggest favor your enemies can do is show you exactly who they really are in front of everyone who matters.